I'm here with Kaylin Barker. You live in West Virginia. You've run for office in West Virginia. You've been a long time activist. I'd say progressive agitator, which I like. But I wanted to talk to you because, again, I think there's just this generic 360 view on Manchin that the media is perpetrating, that he's really intent on bipartisanship, that he's really, sticking to his principles, blah, blah, blah. But they don't follow the money. They don't follow the corruption. And there's a lot of money and there's a lot of corruption tied to Manchin in West Virginia. Can you kind of talk about what first got you involved in state politics here, and what is Joe Manchin doing or not doing for struggling people here?
Well, I started out in politics in West Virginia because as a, lesbian mother, my rights were under attack and are continued to be under attack by the West Virginia legislature every session. So that's really what got me started, is to make sure that, my family was protected. But Joe Manchin has been the thorn in the side of West Virginians for decades. He started out in the state legislature and, ran for governor in, I think, 96 the first time, and he lost the primary to Charlotte Pritt, who is a very pro-union, pro-labor, very progressive individual. And he actually started a Democrats for Underwood group, which was the Republican person on the ticket that year. So, it's not about party for him. It's about alliances and who he's friends with and where the money comes from.
He lost the primary. All we hear from Democrats is vote blue no matter who. They would fall in line to Bernie supporters in 2016, 2020. But in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, from the beginning, if it didn't work out for him, he pushed a Republican.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, our current governor, Jim Justice, was handpicked by Joe Manchin to run, and he switched his party to Democrat to run for governor. Joe Manchin touted him all over the state, did all this fundraising and stuff for him, and then he got into the governor's mansion and switched back to Republican. And no one batted an eye at that. It was not even surprising. No, and the Democratic Party in West Virginia has never apologized to the voters for being duped by Manchin and Justice into this, this game that they're playing. And, the voters have totally lost their trust in the Democratic Party in West Virginia, and it's because of things that Joe Manchin has done.
And also Jim Justice, who Manchin pushed as his little puppet candidate, he's got some corruption problems of his own. Very wealthy man who has borderline bent the law. Can you kind of talk about Jim Justice, the current governor? What's his background that Manchin was propping up?
Yeah, so Jim Justice is one of the biggest polluting coal barons in West Virginia. He owns mines all over Appalachia, has unpaid mine fines all over Appalachia, doesn't pay his taxes, owes millions of dollars in taxes. And Joe Manchin has been connected to the coal industry since before he was born. His family has always been involved in the coal industry. So it's not surprising that he would pick a coal baron who's a billionaire to run for governor in West Virginia to basically take over as governor when Earl Ray Tomlin was done. So none of this is surprising to people in West Virginia. It's just we're the ones that get screwed in the end, and nobody talks about that. They're talking about Manchin's position now, but Manchin's position still leaves West Virginians fighting for basic necessities like clean air and clean water.
And I want to bring up something that's just transparently corrupt. This was from The Intercept. They got their hands on audio of a call that Joe Manchin was doing with private equity donors, big-time financial donors, about the filibuster, about the Voting Rights Act, and all these things. And Joe Manchin, on this private call with donors, said to them, essentially told them, here's how you could bribe Republican Roy Blunt, who is retiring, to get him to vote for the things that Democrats want. He said, when it comes to Senator Roy Blunt, a moderate Missouri Republican who voted no on the January 6th commission, Manchin offered a creative solution. Quote, Roy Blunt is great, just a good friend of mine, a great guy. Roy is retiring. If some of you all who might be working with Roy in his next life could tell him, that'd be nice and it would help our country. That would be very good to get him to change his vote. Let me repeat that. If some of you all who might be working with Roy in his next life could tell him, that'd be nice and it'd help our country. Essentially, if you guys can dangle the little lobbyist stick over Roy Blunt, that would be helpful to get his vote for the January 6th commission. It doesn't seem to me that's the first time in West Virginia Joe Manchin has basically sold out West Virginians to lobbyists, coal barons. He gets a lot of money also from lawyers who, by the way, these lawyers, they benefited from Trump's tax cut in 2017. But I don't see anything from the state party here opposing Joe Manchin. They seem to go along with this. Can you kind of talk about other examples, other things Joe Manchin has done here that were just straight up corruption?
I mean, there's really so many that it's hard to pick. But
We got some.
yeah, so I mean, one of the ones that's glaring to me is like his daughter is or was the CEO of Mylan Pharmaceuticals, who was the maker of the EpiPen, and they gouged the prices of the EpiPen by like 600% or something ridiculous, and they were brought before Congress and all of this, and Manchin was just like, oh, that's how business works, and but at the same time his wife was at the head of the education department, forced schools to carry EpiPens at the same time that this was going on. So, I mean, it's not just him as, a senator, it's him in every aspect of his life. I mean, he bought and paid for his daughter's master's degree at WVU when she only completed maybe half of the hours. So, nobody paid for my master's degree except for me. I didn't have some rich senator paying my way through school and only have to take half the classes. It's just glaring in one of the poorest and sickest states in the country. Every single member of our congressional delegation is a member of the millionaire class. That something's not right. When people live in poverty that's comparable to a third world country and every single person that represents us in Congress is a millionaire, there's a disconnect. And nobody's talking about the fact that, West Virginians are suffering every day because of the choices these people make.
And I also wanted to bring up more recently, Paula Jean Swearingen primaried Manchin in 2018. We were on the ground, actually, the night of the primary. She lost, but honestly, what did she get, like 40% of the vote against an entrenched Democratic senator? She had no name recognition other than knocking on doors for a year. So she got about 40% of the vote, if I'm correct. I think I'm correct on that, against Manchin. Then she runs again 2020 against Senator Shelley Moore Capito, happens to be one of Manchin's BFFs. This didn't get much attention in the national media, probably not the local media either, but it seems like Manchin did the same thing, which was sabotage the Democratic candidate to help out a Republican. Can you kind of talk about, I know you were trying to help Paula Jean get elected, what he did to ensure Paula Jean would lose?
Yeah, it wasn't just Manchin, it was the state party as a whole. There were some county parties that were really awesome and helped the campaign and put out signs and knock doors for us. But, Manchin was, on Facebook and Twitter, which those posts are now gone miraculously. But, at the time he was, I can't wait to work with, Senator Capito again on whatever piece of legislation it was. I don't even remember what it was at this point. But, just touting about how he was excited to work with her again. And, they were going to lunches and vacations and fishing trips and all these things together, and they were posting pictures and whatnot, and it was very overt. It wasn't like he was going out and like knocking doors and doing stump speeches for her, but it was obvious that he was stonewalling Paula at every chance. And the party, I mean, the state Democratic Party did nothing. And that's an issue that's been going on for a while in the state, is that if you're a progressive candidate, the state party will do anything and everything they can to shut you out. They don't really help anyone unless they're handpicked by Manchin. This last election season, the only person that really the state party helped was Ben Salango, who ran for governor, and he was handpicked by Manchin. So, I mean, it's a continuous issue within the party that they're only helping people who Manchin gives the green light to.
Right. And I also want to be clear, as a journalist, I don't know this for a fact, but there's a lot of people here in West Virginia that say the head of the state party here, Belinda Biafor, who, go check out Status Quo's Substack, we've broken 2 stories on her, is Joe Manchin's cousin. I reached out to them for comment for a story about a wildly racist state executive committee meeting they held. It's basically the state Democratic Party held a meeting among the executive committee. They were voting on an affirmative action plan, but didn't think they should allow in members of the affirmative action committee into the meeting. They wanted to invite them in after the mostly white executive committee voted on an affirmative action plan. But there's a lot of talk that Manchin and the state party chair are cousins or related somehow. All I can tell you is I reached out to the state party with questions, including to confirm that. They didn't respond. So if they're not cousins, they could have said, no, there's no relation here. But when you're saying Manchin basically runs the state party here, and the state party, all we hear nationally is, unite, fall in line, vote blue no matter who. But on the state level, they're selling out the actual Democratic nominee because essentially Manchin says so.
Yeah, I mean, with the last election with Paula, I've ran the numbers over and over and over again with that election, and it's obvious by looking at the less progressive congressional candidates and Paula as the Senate candidate. You can see clearly where people who voted for the less progressive and less loud, congressional candidates, they got votes that Paula did not. And those votes were clearly made up on the Republican side. So the question is, where do those votes come from? Are Republicans voting for, more moderate Democrats, or are the moderate Democrats voting for the Republican, which is exactly what I think happened. Because that's what happens in West Virginia. There's a very blurry line that tends to, cross over between Democrat and Republican here. And it's not, people have just lost faith in both parties, really. The only reason the Republican Party does so well is because they have God, guns, and abortion. If it wasn't for that, people in West Virginia wouldn't really vote Republican, because when you talk to people one-on-one about issues, they want universal health care, they want a jobs plan, they want infrastructure, they want all these things that are, considered radical progressive ideas. But when it comes down to voting, they treat it more like a football game. It's like red versus blue, and they just happen to be on the red team right now.